So Ruben Sellers has been sacked by Sheffield United after just 5 games of this championship season, but I'm wondering who's going to be next. In today's video we're going to be looking into Sheffield United and also predicting who the next managerial casualty could be in the second tier. I want to hear from you guys in the comments down below. How much pressure do you feel your manager is under at your club right now? As always, do drop a like if you're going to enjoy, but without any further ado, let's jump in. Following Sheffield United's defeat against Ipswich Town on Friday night, Ruben Sellers was relieved of his duties, and ultimately this didn't come as much of a surprise. Sheffield United sit rock bottom of the league after 5 matches, 0 points on the board, just 1 goal scored and 12 goals conceded. I do think that Sellers would have been afforded a little bit more time, even if Sheffield United had lost against Ipswich, but there was a bit more promise in their performance and a sign of things to come. But ultimately, it just feels like they've been getting worse as the season's gone along, and that heavy of a defeat, coming off the back of an international break where he will have got a little bit more time to work with the players and new recruits that came in towards the back end of the transfer window, I think the board have seen that and said, yeah, it's time we cut things here. You can't really make the argument that Sheffield United have just got unlucky in the matches that they've lost either, because their underlying data has been among the worst clubs in the league so far. In terms of XG, they're right down there, only 4.9 in their first 5 matches, albeit they have badly underperformed that, having only scored 1 goal so far. They have been incredibly wasteful in the final third. But also in terms of chances against, only 5 teams have faced a higher XG than the Blades have so far this season. 7.6 XG they've faced in those opening 5 matches, and one of the strong suits of Sellers at Hull City towards the back end of last season was how well he had that team set up defensively, but we've seen no evidence of that at Sheffield United this season. They were so vulnerable in that game against Ipswich on Friday night. Michael Cooper has looked like a shadow of his former self this season, really lacking confidence, as are the vast majority of that squad, and it just feels like that team, for whatever reason, hasn't bought into Ruben Sellers. And so while it is incredibly early to be changing a manager, I have to back this decision. And we spoke about it in yesterday's video as well, but the run of fixtures that Sheffield United have coming up, there are a lot of winnable games on the horizon here, and I just think that throwing a new manager into this run of games gives them a decent chance to have a good springboard and to finally gather a little bit of momentum. It was clear that the messaging wasn't working under Ruben Sellers. You throw someone like a Chris Wilder, who it's looking like will be going back in there, back into this run of games, I'd fancy them to pick up quite a few points over these next few weeks. A key cut-off point is this October international break. So we've got these next 4 matches coming up here. Games against Charlton, Oxford, Southampton and Hull. With Chris Wilder in charge, I'd back Sheffield United to get a fair few points out of those 4 matches. Suddenly, if that's the case and you're going into the October international break, let's say looking a little bit more comfortable somewhere in mid-table, then you can use that as the real springboard going forward. It does have to be said that this season is giving major flashbacks to the 2021/22 season when Sheffield United appointed Slavisa Jokanovic at the start of the season. That was just an appointment that did not work out whatsoever. They afforded him a little bit more time, ultimately sacking him in November when Sheffield United were lower mid-table, around 18th, I think, when they sacked him. Hired Paul Heckingbottom, and at that point they just went on this amazing run, ultimately lost in the playoffs, but Heckingbottom managed to galvanise that squad and get them performing at the level that we all thought they were capable of. And I have a feeling that a similar thing could happen this season with Chris Wilder coming back in. Now, don't get me wrong, the Sheffield United board don't come out of this with a lot of glory. It makes them look incredibly silly and naive, in my opinion, to have got rid of Wilder in the first place, to have headed in this fresh direction, to then immediately go back to Wilder. It leaves them with egg on their face, there's no doubt about that. Now, I was of the opinion over the summer that they absolutely should have kept hold of Chris Wilder. I think the points he delivered last season, to lose in the playoff final in the manner of which they did so late on against Sunderland, he was absolutely worthy of having another crack at the championship this season. Now, I get that the board wanted to go in their own direction, a more progressive style both on and off the pitch was being discussed, wasn't it? But the fact that they're willing to rip that plan up completely after just 5 games, I think does show their naivety in this situation. Sheffield United fans, I want to hear from you in the comments down below though. What's a realistic finish for you with Chris Wilder coming back in? Do you think the top 6 is still a realistic prospect? Because I still think it's in touching distance, you know. They're 9 points off it right now, but there's still a lot of football to be played between now and the end of the season. I still think the squad they've got is very capable. But we now have had our first managerial casualty of this season. What I'm asking is who's going to be next on the chopping block, because I'm especially looking towards that next international break, which is coming up in just a few weeks' time, and thinking that's definitely going to be a bit of a graveyard for some underperforming Championship managers. For me personally, the managers I could potentially see being sacked next, following on from Ruben Selles, I think I'd throw Watford's Paulo Pezzolano into that category. Just 1 win in 5 for Watford. If they go into this next international break without a great track record over the next 4 matches, I think he could find himself under pressure, especially with Watford's lofty ambitions. You know, the owners spoke at the end of last season of how they want to be competing for the top 6 this season. That's not quite been the case so far. Sergei Kirovic at Hull City, I think is fine for the time being. I think Hull have shown enough promise in the games that they have picked up points, that there are some good building blocks to build upon. However, I do think that if Hull find themselves in the bottom 3 come this next international break, you know, they go on a bad run over these next 4 or so games, let's say, he could find himself in hot water as well, especially with how trigger happy the owner has tended to be with managers there. An obvious shout right now, I think, has to be Phil Parkinson at Wrexham. With the amount of expenditure over the summer, you absolutely cannot rule out the board looking to make a change there. He's obviously got more credit in the bank than most Championship managers with the consecutive promotions he's delivered in the lower leagues recently, but the Championship is a completely different ball game, and I don't think the Wrexham ownership were anticipating a start this slow. Just 4 points taken from their first 5 matches. Not a great performance over the weekend against QPR either, it has to be said. Gary Rowett, while Oxford are still winless, I think he's absolutely fine for the time being. I think that Oxford realise how much of an asset Gary Rowett actually is to that club. However, if we find ourselves going into this next international break and Oxford still haven't won a match, maybe there is a little bit of pressure that starts to build there as well, as the Oxford higher-ups have proven themselves to be quite brutal when making managerial changes in the past, obviously, with that change they made last season with Des Buckingham when they were on quite a poor run of form. So I'll highlight Oxford for the time being. I don't think Rowett will be the next manager to be sacked. I think that Oxford will pick up some points over these next few weeks, which will probably bump them up a few places in the league before this next international break. But should Oxford still be winless going into that break, who knows? So I think realistically, with everything being taken into consideration at the moment, the most realistic candidates to be leaving next are probably Paulo Pezzolano at Watford, depending on how these next few matches go. Sergei Kirovic at Hull, maybe, if things don't go well over these next few weeks. Phil Parkinson at Wrexham, though, I think will be looking a little bit twitchy at the moment. Especially with these reports that we had coming out about Parkinson. Prior to the QPR match, there were discussions that reportedly took place about Parkinson's future. This was all before they played QPR as well, and that game obviously didn't unfold very well. With Wrexham spending so much over the summer, I don't think the club will be wanting to be engulfed into a relegation battle in the Championship, and I think that their loyalty with Parkinson surely will only go so far. With the ambition that Wrexham have shown on and off the pitch over these last few years with this new ownership, I think that they will be tempted at some point of this season to upgrade the man in the dugout, as brutal as that would seem. I think that tactically, Parkinson isn't quite in tune with those top managers in the Championship, and Wrexham would definitely be able to attract some of the big boys to the dugout there, with the amount of money they'd be paying and how much expenditure and backing they can give their managers. It does have to be said, but the underlying data has been quite concerning from Wrexham. I know we're only using quite a small sample size of matches here, you know, just 5 games have been played so far, but considering an XG of 11.1 in their first 5 matches, higher than any other Championship club so far this season. They've just looked so gettable, haven't they? And I get that that's part of their plan, to soak up pressure, look to break at teams on the counter-attack, but in a league like the Championship, when you're facing quality teams week in, week out, soaking up pressure often can end up in you just shooting yourself in the foot, really, because teams will find a way to unlock and break you down, maybe like teams in League 1 and 2 in the National League couldn't, because they didn't have that same quality. And you know what, in terms of the fixture list before the next international break, it's not an easy run for Wrexham either. They go away to Norwich, which will be tough, although saying that, Wrexham have looked maybe a bit more competitive in their away matches so far than their home games. Obviously, they got that good win away at Millwall, to be fair to them, didn't they? At home against Derby, I think that'll be a tough one, with Derby only improving with getting more players back, and I think they can be a really tough nut to crack away from home. They've then got that one against Leicester and then play Birmingham before the international break. So 4 really tricky looking matches for Wrexham there, and I just think that if they're in the bottom 3 come this October international break, that could be the moment they look to pull the trigger, maybe. I think Oxford are another one of those clubs who need to get a win on the board before the next international break as well. In their next 4 games, they've got games against Bristol City, Sheffield United, QPR and Watford. That head-to-head against Watford, I think, will be really quite interesting. Bristol City away is a tough one. I think that Sheffield United at home is made considerably tougher by the fact they've just got rid of Ruben Selles. If that game was taking place last week or over the weekend, most people would absolutely be backing Oxford to win that game at home, but the change at Sheffield United could make that one a bit of a banana skin. QPR have shown that they can score goals, although could be a bit vulnerable at the back themselves. And then, yeah, that head-to-head against Watford is very interesting. What does somewhat count against Oxford, though, is the fact that before this next international break, 3 of their next 4 games are away from home. And we all know that, historically, Oxford have struggled a little bit more away from home than they have at home. So that's worth taking into consideration. On the flip side, Hull have 3 of their next 4 games at home. They've got games against Southampton, Watford, Preston and Sheffield United before the international break. It's a tough one to put your finger on so far, Hull, for me personally, because I think that going forward, they've shown quite a bit of promise. I think that Ryan Giles has looked a bit reinvigorated since last season. A brilliant assist for him over the weekend with that sort of trademark run down the left-hand side and whip into Ollie McBurney, who's been a terrific pickup for the Tigers. But defensively, they need to cut out those basic mistakes, and they've got a mixed bag, I'd say, over the next 4 games. But one of the managers that will absolutely be facing a lot of scrutiny if he doesn't have a good track record over these next 4 matches is Paolo Pezzolano at Watford. They've got games against Millwall, Hull City, Portsmouth and Oxford before the international break. I think that's a reasonable run of games, and I think that they will be able to pick up enough points in that period to keep him in the job and with the faith of the board for the time being. They were really poor over the weekend against Blackburn, but maybe you can put that down to a typical sort of post-international break sort of performance. I don't know, I'd be interested to know from you guys, looking at the league table right now, who do you feel is the most likely candidate to be losing their job next? And is there anyone in this that we've perhaps not mentioned yet? Will still at Southampton, for example, 6 points from 5 matches. Isn't exactly a flying start, is it? Didn't think they were particularly great over the weekend against Portsmouth either. Portsmouth the better side in that one for me. McKenna at Ipswich, I think they're coming off the back of that big win over the weekend against Sheffield United, aren't they? And I think that he's already got enough credit in the bank that despite a slow start to the season, they were always going to back him long term anyway. Then going back down, I think that Ishmael getting 6 points, 2 wins from 5 is decent enough considering the circumstances behind the scenes at Blackburn. And Nathan Jones isn't going anywhere anytime soon at Charlton, is he? So guys, I'd be interested to know from you in the comments down below on this one. But if you did go on to enjoy today's video, make sure to drop a like, get all your thoughts in the comments down below, and I'll catch you all in the next one.